Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and very soon back to Diablo 4. Season 7 is just around the corner now, and as usual, the familiar questions come back up. What are the stronger classes, in theory, going into the new season? No one wants the class to be the weakest, and in ARPGs, a lot of people just want to play the strong thing. So I hope this video can help you make more of an educated choice on that. But keep in mind that this is of course theory-based, based on what we saw in the PTR, and now the patch notes they've given us. For most of this, we have a pretty good understanding and awareness of how things look, but do take it with a grain of salt, you never truly know what will happen. We begin the video by cutting the classes up into two groups though. The two sort of clear winners, and then the rest. This essentially means that you've got 4 classes that actually look solid on paper and can do everything you want in the season very well, no problem. It's just that 2 classes seemingly have the most potential, the highest pit pushes and impressive showings, that kind of thing. So in that lower group then, let's begin with Sorcerer. Last season was certainly a rough one for Sorcerer, so there was certainly hope in Season 7 that they'd buff it. That was pretty interesting when we saw how underwhelming it was in the PTR. If you watch the Season of Witchcraft Big Dev livestream, you can see on the screen that they stated it was the weakest class in the Season 7 PTR. So it wasn't really up for debate, that was bad. But don't let those issues ruin things for you. They provided the most buffs to any one class to Sorcerer, coming into the Season 7 launch from PTR, particularly on the passive side of things, opening up new options for builds that actually haven't ever been viable to try. They named Searing Heat and Icefall as the biggest contenders in relation to those buffs, so these should be able to apply significantly more to all damage types, resulting in the use in many more builds. Josh is our Sorcerer main of the channel, and he actually thinks Sorcs will be dealing roughly double damage on average across the top builds, say compared to last season. Will it be enough? We'll have to see, but they named things like the Firebolt enchantment being changed for PTR and has now been changed even more. It'll trigger an extra Firebolt when you trigger the heal on that 10% chance. And Fireball and Firebolt were generally the most efficient for higher pit pushing, so that should be helpful. The new unique Strike of Stormhorn, well, that wasn't working as it should in the PTR, with some weird range issues. But it looks like they've given it a nice damage boost on top of making it actually work properly, so that should be much more relevant. But either way, it looks like Sorc has more viable build options than they've ever had before. There's valid concern, if you could even call it that the Splintering Energy Lightning Spear build might be back in full force outside of shatter fishing, specifically in the pit. That would be unfortunate if you're a bit over that build concept by now, but it's not guaranteed obviously. Hopefully with the variety of options that they're getting, something fresh will actually prove strongest in the end. But Sorcerer definitely has a lot of testing to do in this new season. But in terms of quality of life and the fun, it's going to be very good for Sorcerer, that's for sure, with a sheer variety of options that could end up working well. And hopefully it'll be time for a build meta shift for this class. Next up in the lower tier, let's talk about Rogue. Rogue actually had one of the more solid showings in the PTR, above average for certain. A pretty cool concept behind it was the ultimate build around Rain of Arrows. If you aren't aware, there's some new special bonuses coming in for ultimates when you get them to rank 5, and that was causing some issues. Going into the PTR, Rain of Arrows damage was up with less delay before the arrows actually started dealing their DPS. They also bumped up the lucky hit chance, which is cool, but a big part was the double dipping nature of that max rank skill. 100% of the damage stat for distant enemies was also applying to Rain of Arrows directly. Now it wasn't broken busted damage compared to some of the other stuff we saw, but it was really good. So that seems to be changed a bit going into Season 7. Their stance on ultimate skills was made a bit clearer in that live stream. Ultimate skill builds, as they say, should be flashy and fun, but the scaling was obviously too high. So, Rain of Arrows scaling is nerfed, but they claim it's not too big of a hit and it should still be viable. I didn't think it was overly strong in a problematic way in the PTR, and they nerfed it, so we'll see. But obviously I need to mention the pretty big changes to Shadow Clone, referring to how it counts like a minion would. Minions and how they work have changed a lot over the last few seasons, but its damage will be counted as player damage. So for Rogue, it'll take the benefits you have right as you cast it, snapshotting that into the clone. This will also apply for skills like the imbuements, so snapshotting some serious power into the clone right before you press it so it spawns even more powerful. Reminding me of say Season 6 with the Dance of Knives and snapshotting the power before you spin. To me, that suggests Rogue could have some seriously busted potential with Shadow Clone focused setups that haven't really been tested, and I could definitely see it being amazing for boss killing. But right now, I'm expecting it to be good, but maybe not the best. Moving forward in the same tier, but seemingly with a lot of potential, it's Barbarian, which they felt was doing solid in the PTR. Barb has been in a messy spot for a while now, so having a clear winning build would definitely be good for them. In the PTR, we started to see a nice showing of the Hammer of Ancients with the exploding Earthquake build that was opened up with a new unique. Mantle of Mountain's Fury is that new unique chest armor. It causes Hammer of the Ancients to trigger this seismic line, dealing damage in a slow. But if that line passes through earthquakes, it causes them to pop for their total damage and consumes them. A pretty neat and effective concept, but it hadn't exactly taken down Mighty Throw as the best option. So, since the PTR, the Earthquake setup has been buffed in a variety of ways. It seems like they want us to play it. Improvements to the aspects involved, the unique had a damage bump, the skills got a bump, so Hammer got a 10% buff, multiple Quake aspects had damage buffs, and more. It definitely has a shot to contest Mighty Throw, and like I say, I think they want it to. On the other hand, they've also buffed Whirlwind a bit for maybe better mob clear purposes. It's about 4% damage bump. So, Whirlwind should be a great option for leveling still, clear in general, outside of maybe what takes the top spot in the endgame. They're confident then that Barbarian's in a good place, and they've made various improvements to that Quake build since they seem to want us to play it. Overall then, Sim's solid. But lastly, for this lower, solid tier, as we're apparently calling it, it's Druid, which is one of maybe the biggest question marks we have right now. That's because in the PTR, there was a totally busted and bugged build going on that has been fixed, which means it's also going to be one of the harder classes to fairly judge going in. Basically, the PTR bug was to do with the Survival Instincts passive, which works with Overpower in the bear form. Basically, a big damage bonus if you're full health, and a massive Overpower scaling concept behind that too. You were meant to deal up to 25% times more overpower damage based on the life difference between you and the enemy, but that calculation was not working properly, leading to comical amounts more than it should be, even showing minus numbers on screen, breaking the caps of what were meant to be shown as damage numbers. Either way, you hit things, they died instantly. And what sucks about that bug being a thing then is that it made it very hard to test the main builds properly, to see what's actually reasonably good in relation to all of this. So it is just hard to say where Druid's really going to be. What we do know is that the Cataclysm build was pretty decent in the PTR. There's obvious potential for the Boulder and Survival Instincts build, if it's working as intended now. And they also mentioned they reworked Blurred Beast a bit, which was an aspect they changed going into the PTR, and they've changed it again. Meant for Shred is giving you bonus strikes based on the distance you traveled when using the skill, which is just a really awkward concept in real use. Now it's just a simple chance to proc whenever you use it, which is going to be much more smooth, so Shred builds do have potential as well. It's also worth noting that Spirit Burns were changed a bit too. They want them to be more impactful sooner, but it's more of a across-the-board thing, a benefit for Druids as a whole, but it should be nice for the leveling experience. So yes, overall, Druids we don't know for sure. It's more than likely that it's going to be good, but as one of the harder classes to test properly because of that bug, it's going to be interesting to see where it turns out. Alright, so that brings us to the tier above the rest. The two classes that look like they have the serious potential based on the PTR and the changes we know about going into Season 7. Let's begin with the king of Season 6, the Spiritborn. As the devs described it, Spiritborn was very strong on the PTR. That's interesting because they were calling others good or the weakest or whatever passive term, but then they called Spiritborn very strong. And despite that fact, they're introducing minimal changes from the PTR to the launch of Season 7. Even a bit of buffs coming in for, say, the Seeker's Ultimate at the rank 5 scaling, but other than that, there's not a lot of ups and downs to this class. That's interesting because what they've said is that they want to make the rest of the classes perform similar to how Spiritborn is, rather than reduce the power of Spiritborn, and I'm certainly okay with that. It gives us a good idea of how Spiritborn's going to go initially because it's going to be similar to that PTR, but in particular, with that in mind, the Razor Wings aspect, Endless Talons, seems like the kind of core reason that Razor Wings is going to be maybe one of the better builds to go with. It was increasing your Eagle skill damage and giving some crit potential, but that scaling didn't seem to have a cap. They didn't really seem to say anything about that overscaling in the stream or the notes, but you have to imagine that it's working as intended now, surely. But since they've not really taken it down a peg from the PTR, it should be performing similarly, and it was very good, as we said. So we do think it's going to be a top contender once again, but that brings us to the last class to talk about, the top contender for the season, Necromancer. It was indeed insane, and so it's also speculated to still be the strongest class going into Season 7. A big part of this is of course the ultimates, and like we said with rogues, they were overperforming for what they envisioned for them. With Necromancer, it was getting that double dipping scaling, but in a kind of uncapped bugged way. This was shown between Army the Dead, which massively improved your minion output, and then Blood Wave. The most popular thing in the PTR was a shadow version of that, which was leaning into that new unique, the Keseme's Legacy unique legs. That causes 2 waves to come out on each cast, along with a stacking debuff for more and more wave damage. It would also group enemies in by pulling them in, which is an insane concept. In that PTR, it was dealing comical output because it was letting you scale uncapped damage off that concept, and that was the case as well for the Army of the Dead. So both of them were scaling well beyond reason, and they talked about this on that live stream. These bugs have now been addressed, and yet we still think Necromancer is going to be insane. They made it very clear actually in that live stream, where Necromancer minions will win out compared to everyone else in regards to summons. They're going to have much more reliable lucky hit procs, bonus damage effects, and of course the scaling of R stats and R damage increases. They actually directly claimed that Summon Necromancer is going to be at its peak in Season 7. So is that going to be the best build? Maybe, but you know, the blood stuff is pretty insane. Bone Spear, in fact, has high potential, as well as, of course, the Blood Wave focus that still sims nuts. So there's 2 unique pants, right? The one that makes the Blood Wave double and pull in. But then for Bone Spear, you've got this Indira's Memory unique. It turns Bone Spear into a blood skill, a blood spear. And then Blood Wave becomes a bone skill instead, spawning in bone prisons at its end point. They work in unison now. Blood Wave makes blood skills damage shoot up, so Bone Spear hits harder, and then Bone Spear reduces the cooldown of your Blood Waves. Further, Bone Spear will start to consume corpses to spawn new Blood Spears from that location, literally unlocking a combined Blood Bone build, and revives Bone Spear at long last. So you've got insanely strong potential for minion builds, massive Bloodbone build potential, and then Shadow Wave build potential, which was the top performer of the PTR. So whatever way you go, it promises to be really strong, and so it's an exciting time for Necromancer. And that brings us to the end of this overview. Which class should you play then? Well, I guess if you're a meta slave, it looks like Necromancer has the most potential this season, in theory, but in my honest opinion, as always, just play the thing you were going to enjoy the most. If you really like Sorcerer, play it. Every class can clear everything of relevance in Diablo 4 with a good build and setup. It only really matters if you're trying to push the highest clears, which is just for fun. There's no actual reason or reward after all. But yeah, I hope this overview was useful. Let's see how things truly turn out when we get going. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.